Has your mind been colonized? Are you unknowingly being contained by the limits and boundaries set by the colonial powers? In this video, we explore this topic further.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to pose a question today, and that is, should we as Muslims accept being colonized? When we look at Muslims today, all of us, all Muslims in all countries, we operate within certain political, legal, and economic frameworks. But these frameworks, these constructs are imposed that were imposed during colonial rule, and we treat them, unfortunately, as permanent realities that can't be changed. Even Islamic activism is often built within those inherited constructs, the international order. Rather than questioning their legitimacy, the foundational principles on which they're based, we tend to accept them. Islam does not recognize permanent political subordination. So we as Muslims, therefore, should base our collective orientation on Islamic principles rather than these externally imposed systems. So what I would like to ask you today is really give us a sort of a historical context to unpack this dilemma that we're in.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today, inshallah, you've raised some very pertinent issues that Muslims are facing at this current time. And when we look in the world today, we see many obstacles in the lives of everyday Muslims. We see the situation in Gaza, we see poverty, we see destitution, we see confusion, and people who are apparently Islamic but not necessarily so Islamic. And we see all these things, and we've got to really ask ourselves, why is that happening? And one of the things I think we're looking at is that we're accustomed to not living according to Islamic principles, not living according to the what the Sharia has actually mandated for us. Not necessarily on a personal level, but you're talking on a level of society, on a collective level, as Muslims as a whole. So that's the backdrop of today's discussion, inshallah. This is what we need to explore. Why is it that we've accepted that this reality, colonialism, is a permanent feature of Muslim societies? We really need to understand that. And to do that, what we can do today, inshallah, is to explore various aspects of that so that we get a more refined understanding of what's actually going on. And the first thing, and the place to start, is the issue of what is colonialism. Do you have any ideas about that in terms of how people view colonialism generally? This is something that people, when they think about it, it's something which is not necessarily clear what that means in terms of how it impacts us as Muslims, and indeed non-Muslim nations were colonized as well.
I think colonialism, you can get a dictionary definition, but the way I look at colonialism is when countries have actually gone into other lands, they've invaded, they've subjugated the people. Yeah. So they've actually taken over the people, the subjects. They've taken over administration of the country. And if it's colonialism is linked with imperialism, where they go and extract the resources and bring them to a centralized, back home, if you like. So colonialism is subjugation, slavery to the master, whoever's dominating them. And this domination, there's a physical domination, but I guess there is also an intellectual domination of the subjected people.
And that's an interesting point that you raised there. When most people imagine colonialism, they think it's the occupation of the country and the taking over of that country. But the taking over that country is not just a mere physical thing. It's not that the British, for example, came to India and they took it over militarily. There's a lot more to that, facilitating colonialism. And what we see is that there are different types or different strands in which colonialism actually takes control in different places. So you have economic colonialism, whereby the country's whole economic structure is run in a way which mimics the colonizing country, i.e. the way that they do business and the principles that they run their economy on are applied there, not for the benefit of the people, but for the benefit of exploiting and taking resources. And that structure is fixed in place, and we'll talk about that, inshallah. And also, we look at a type of colonialism, which is the colonialism of the minds. The minds are actually controlled by thoughts and ideas, which become institutionalized in the colonized countries, and the behavior of the people is shaped in such a way that behavior is in tune with the colonizers' ideology, their way of thinking, so that it makes it easier for them to communicate with the people and to take the resources and exploit the people of those places. So colonialism in itself is a given that we have in the Muslim world, but it's often unrecognized, that it's not understood that we are actually colonized, and people conduct themselves in a way that they think, well, this is normal, and this has become a permanent feature, and that's something that we need to really dig into and discuss.
I think it's interesting here. You mentioned a lot of people do think that colonialism has died. It's finished. It's a post-colonial world order. How? Because the colonizers have physically left those lands. So the military domination has ceased, but I think they've left their administrative systems there. And you talked about the economy as well. The economy is is still integrated. When you look at African nations are still under the auspices of the French. They speak the language. So there is a certain amount of culture changing, the cultural reorientation, if you like. So would you agree with that?
Of course, this is reality, and as you rightly pointed out, that after the Second World War, many of these countries were given so-called independence. So we see that in the subcontinent, India and Pakistan, they were given independence, but independence from what? It was independence from a direct control, but what they left in place in those countries was a full apparatus and institutions that carried on the principles that the British left behind. And it's interesting that you raised the point about the subcontinent. We could look to the history of the subcontinent and the Indian subcontinent. We see that for many centuries, some people say 800 years, some people say longer than that, that Islam was actually ruling in India. But what did that actually mean? And what does ruling actually mean in these areas? What it actually means is that the disputes amongst the people were settled on the basis of Islam. The law of the land was the Sharia law, and that was what was applied by, for example, the Mughals. But that came to an end in the 1850s in the so-called Muslim Mutiny. And at that point, the British assumed direct control of the subcontinent, and they supplanted their own way of thinking, way of doing things, and their penal codes. And a lot of the laws that we find in both India, Pakistan, and even other countries like Nigeria are remnants of the British ruling there. And that has carried on to this very day. And that has an impact on people's lives every day. And so we see all these elements of colonialism, yet we don't recognize them. We don't think of ourselves as have been subjected to colonialism, and the goalposts or the parameters within which you operate are dictated by outside powers, not by Islam. And as Muslims, we need to really appreciate that, because it has deep ramifications on our lives and the way that Muslims live and the way that they connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
You know, I've always been perplexed about this situation where you say that, yes, when the occupiers, the colonial powers, they withdrew from the Muslim lands, the physical withdrawal can be seen. But were the Muslims living in those lands, were they so subdued intellectually that they didn't see that the systems that they left were still, foreign systems? Or did they actually, the only way I can explain it is that they actually looked highly at these systems that they left behind, because their systems were probably not working effectively. Otherwise, if Muslims were on the ball, if you like, then they should have realized, hang on, you've left this system, take that as well. Yeah. So, how can they call themselves independent when you see that for example, the French rule in Algeria, France invaded Algeria in 1830, and they had a code de l'Indigène, I think it is, of 1881. That was a sort of institutionalized. It had a sort of a differential legal status between settlers and indigenous Muslims. So they subordinated the local authority to French civil law. Now, could the Muslims of Algeria not see that this was French civil law that they were living by and not Islamic?
In every place we see where the colonialists went, they met with resistance, and even to this day, even in Iraq, for example, they encountered stiff resistance. In Afghanistan, a lot of places where they tried to take over physically, they've found resistance amongst the Muslims. We know the stories about Umar al-Makhtar and different people who actually resisted, but that was on one level. But
Yes.
where they were successful was on the level where you can't necessarily see the colonialism, but it's on the level of ideas, thoughts, and the way that people think, and that is done through the institutions by co-opting even ulema. You look at the likes of Jamal al-Din Afghani, and maybe we can do something on that, which explains what did they actually do and how did they actually restructure Egypt. And many of the people that many of the movements that they funded and trends that they funded were there to perpetuate their rule. And this is something that Muslims didn't recognize, because their linkage to collective affairs on the basis of Iman, on the basis of Islam, on the basis of, if you want to call it spirituality, and linking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to your everyday affairs in public life, that link had been severed, and Muslims were at a loss to see that. And the second point was that they saw advancement in the lives of the West, whereas they came out of the Dark Ages, went through the Renaissance, and they had an industrial revolution, and their technology became superior to that in the Muslim world, and they felt themselves lagging behind because they were following Islam. And there was a trend for Muslims not to follow Islam and imitate the West, and these type of ideas took hold, and they exist to this very day. That many, some Muslims, they want to look at this whole scenario, and they understand that we should be mimicking the West. So when we want technology, we should follow the way that the West does it. When we want to have a political system, we should look at the West, and that's the way that they consider these things. Yeah. So this is what they've left Muslims with. So 2 points there. Number one, that the Muslims' linkage to Islam and collective affairs became weak, so they couldn't recognize the difference between Islamic rules and what Islam said, and they couldn't recognize the reality of what was being applied over them, and so they left it. And that's what happened. And secondly, that they were enamored by what the West had to offer in terms of technology, in terms of the deception that they put out, in terms of that they were living sophisticated and high-level lives, and had a superior civilization, and Muslims bought into that, and it's something
Yes.
that is with us to this very day.
I think again, it's quite incredible. So, what you're saying is that the Muslims were suffering from a kind of intellectual decline, and you did say that it's they looked at technology. They looked at technology and felt inferior. And when they looked at technology of the European, the West, their industrial revolution, how they lived, and their culture, that's only a people will only do that when they see that their own culture doesn't live up to that reality of what they see, and when they actually shy away or distance themselves from what actually made their civilization great. So I mean, for example, again, you've got the abolition of the Islamic civilization, through the caliphate, being dissolved in 1924. It's incredible that in 1926, the Swiss civil code replaced Islamic legal structures. They embedded secular statutory law. Now, obviously, there are power issues at play here. But again, we didn't really see a sort of a backlash, an intellectual backlash against these alien systems being supplanted, as you said, in the countries.
What's worse, today we don't really see a backlash against what's being applied, because it's not recognized that it is actually being applied, and it is the cause of problems, and the alternative is not necessarily properly conveyed, and that's because Islam is kept out of societal affairs, and often in quite brutal manners, whereby those people who call for Islam as a way of life are brutally suppressed, and in other ways that they're dealt with. So Islam is not allowed to enter the political or collective space when somebody speaks that as a viable system. That's on one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin is the fact that many Muslim movements are not actually aware of how they would actually implement a change or to transform society. So they lose credibility amongst the people, and that gives a sense of permanence to the colonialism that's applied. And we need to look at the recent example of still to this day what's going on in Gaza, and it's been relentless, and it's a clear genocide, and it's something that Muslims have been paralyzed in order to act. The feeling is there, but certainly not many people have raised the issue that there needs to be done. There needs to be something that needs to change structurally amongst Muslims, because you cannot act on the basis of Islam within the constraints that these states have applied on themselves. And we can look at there's recent examples that many Muslims are happy that Muslims of Saudi Arabia, militaries of Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, they're coming together and they're saying this is an Islamic NATO. But it's not an Islamic NATO, because this is something which the colonialists, the Americans, for example, have allowed you to actually do, because it works in their interests in that situation, that they need some balancing power in the region to counter Iran, which is becoming very strong, to also maybe counter the Russians. So they need to balance off the powers so that they can carry on with their colonial agendas in the area. So these are not things which are necessarily positive for Islam. So Muslims start to think that this scenario where colonialism came, removed Islam from life's affairs, and that's become a permanent default position for their activism. And they start to think that this is a normal reality, and we can only work within that particular system. That's the way we should. That's the way we should actually conduct ourselves in terms of activism. Do what you can, work within the system, and really they've accepted permanent colonialism from which we cannot get out of until we recognise that we need to remove the shackles of that colonialism from the mind of Muslims, and by engaging in projects and engaging in activism in the name of Islam, which people say is doing benefit and good for Muslims, we continue to perpetuate our own colonisation and keeping Islam out of society and out of life's affairs. And that's something that we need to recognise, that we cannot accept this situation to be a permanent situation, which many people do by default, by not thinking about the situation clearly.
Forgive me, I want to take you back a little bit. I think a lot of Muslims in the Ummah are very happy to live under the current post-colonial framework, because economically it works for them. Yeah. There may be economic migrants in the West. I mean, the Western, there's a figure of 55 million Muslims living in the Western lands. Most of them are quite happy. Yeah. I don't think they've got any problems with living under this international order. And let me tell you why. Because they're using institutions that have been set up by this international order to solve problems. So we do see Muslims going regularly to the United Nations. You know, if anything happens internationally, they're always talking about international law. You know, they accept pacts, political pacts such as NATO. As I mean, Turkey, for example, Turkey is a member nation of NATO. So would I be correct in actually, you know, making that assertion that one of the reasons that's actually holding the Muslims back, and you mentioned the word paralysis, holding the Muslims back from actually solving any of the Muslims' problems, is because they believe that this world order, this post-colonial framework, actually manages to solve some problems for them.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's entirely fair to say that Muslims living in the West or elsewhere actually feel that the system is actually a fair one and a good one and something that they profit from. Rather, many of them are running after their own.
It's better than any other system. It's better than any other system, because really the Islamic system, they can't see it. They can't touch it. They can't imagine it. No one's proposing an alternative system. And that's the paralysis.
Regardless of what the people actually say, the fact of the matter is that we are Muslims, and as Muslims we're obliged to live in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to live. We've had a history of more than 1300 years of the application of Islam, and it's been unprecedented as a system in terms of its application in the world. What people see today is actually a delusion, and are they really truly happy? Are they really truly benefiting? And is it really a system which brings happiness or misery to the people? And we find that it's created a lot of problems, and you just need to look at the media, you need to look at the Epstein files, you need to look at these what's been going on within this society, look at the level of indebtedness, look at the poverty, look at the homelessness, and these are the realities here that we find ourselves in now in this situation that we find ourselves in. So what we need to do is we need to understand that the only solution for us is to actually link back to what Islam says. This is the challenge that we face is convincing people that we need to go back to the root and make sure everything is consistent with our root. And our root is Islam, and our root is Iman. And the systems that we need to have in life's affairs need to be built upon that. And that's where we need to look at it. So, inshallah, if we just wrap up and summarize there, inshallah. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, it's good. I mean, I think what I gain from today's discussion is that we Muslims really should be questioning. We should be questioning the foundational legitimacy of this post-colonial global world order. Really, we need to be thinking about how this foreign culture, this international system, this global order. I mean, how is it changing our attitudes? Is it changing our attitudes? Is it reshaping our ideas to fit in with that reality? Or, is there any need to even change it? Okay, I mean, the Muslim situation, is it all doom and gloom? I was wanting you to ask that question before we finish. I mean, what you're essentially, the picture that you're painting is really that the ummah needs a factory reset. Yeah, factory setting reset. We need to change. We need to reinvent the civilization. Is that, is that what am I right in thinking that it's all doom and gloom, and how you've made a bigger challenge than perhaps what I initially thought it was going to be?
I mean, I wouldn't look at it as a situation of doom and gloom. As Muslims, we have to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to know that we will have the ups and the downs, we will have the victories and the defeats, and we will need to come out of that, but we need to come out of that intact. What we find is that there are a lot of people that are influenced by that system, and more so many of the movements and projects here that are purporting to work for Islam have entangled themselves within colonialist frameworks, and therefore they will not be able to deliver the required changes that Muslims need to make. And something that Muslims need to recognize, the very recognition of the fact that we are colonized before we undertake any projects or any work in order to bring about a change. Needs to sink into the Muslim psyche, into the Muslim mindset, and a lot of soul searching needs to be done. And the rules of Islam, the Islamic heritage, and the fiqh, and these are known. These not unknown rules, and there are people in the Muslim world who understand these intricately, and they understand what systems of Islam need to be applied and how they could be applied, but they understand it on a level of fiqh, or they understand it at an intellectual level, but not necessarily on a political level in the Muslim countries, because those movements, even movements which are, if you look at Pakistan, for example, even Imran Khan was clamped down because he was out of favor, or is perceived to be a threat to what the colonialists left behind. And it's something that is a challenge for Muslims, but it has to be recognized. And if there's any project here which is working within the situation that we find ourselves in, that project needs to be understood in the correct context. So there's nothing wrong with somebody setting up a madrasa to teach children Quran. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But to say that's going to overturn our bad reality, it's not a suitable way to do it. What's required, we can go into a lot of detail about that, what's required to be changed. But the first thing we need to recognize is that we've been colonized. Our thinking is not clear on how we find ourselves in this situation and how we come out of this situation. And the colonialists have implanted roots or rat runs, if you like, for Muslims to follow in order to try to achieve their aims and ends. But ultimately, they managed to corral the Muslims into their system. And this is going to be the future when this world situation changes. We see now that we've got a scenario where Russia and China are coming up as international players. the unipolar world of the US and the Atlanticists is not necessarily going to be there in the future. But where will Muslims be in that reality? Will they be the subject of agendas from different countries like the Chinese, like the Russians, like the US, like the British, or whoever the players are? Are Muslims just to be victims and to be fed off? Or should they have their own system, their own way of thinking, their own ideology, their own agenda in the world, which is the agenda of Islam? And there's a lot said about that, but what's not recognized is that most movements today are curtailing their actions and their activities within a framework of the colonialists, and they will never be able to come out of that situation until they have like you said, a factory reset and understand the situation properly, that we cannot achieve results for Islam in the system that is put there to keep Islam out. It's not a reality that we can envisage, and it's not something that's been successful. Many Muslims have tried it past 100, 200 years. Many movements have arisen on that basis, but they've not managed to change the situation, and the situation of Muslims gets worse from year to year. Today is Gaza. Tomorrow is now, you hear about troops moving into Syria. You hear about the carpet bombing of cities and villages in Lebanon. Where will it end? And until Muslims take control back and work on the basis of Islam, what Islam said, then is only then that they will be able to break the shackles of colonialism.
Thank you so much for that. I think it really does put into context what revival is. I mean, I think most Muslims throughout the world sincerely want a revival of the Islamic civilization, a revival of an Islamic resurgence. There's a lot of synonyms associated with Muslims coming back into dominance. Muslims having their own authority. And I think it's very clear today that in order to understand how to resolve a problem, I think one needs to understand the context, the reality in which we Muslims find ourselves. I think you've clearly pointed out that we are colonized. Our countries are colonized. Our lands are colonized. There is a great cultural war going on with Islam and, I don't know, modern the modern liberal agenda. So thank you. It's great that we had that discussion, and it's so interesting that we've actually made it clear that before we can even think about coming out of a problem, we really need to understand the nature of the problem that we're in, the reality that we're in. So yes, Muslims operating under a reality, a post-colonial reality, a post-colonial order shaped by the colonial powers. But if Muslims fail to question this reality and why we're in this reality, and we don't understand who's actually fostered this reality to come about, then we will, as Muslims, as an ummah, we will continue to be dominated and colonized. So thank you again. It's been great. Jazakallah khair. And
maybe we can do another one on what it takes to revive.
Inshallah. Yeah. That's great. So I think it's been very clear what you wanted to come across with, but I look forward to it next time. Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Well,